Hello and welcome. I'm Anton Naparella, Education Lead for Games here at Gnomon. I'll be your host tonight. If you're new to Gnomon and want to know what we're all about, we're a 3D art college focused on game art, visual effects, and animation. Tonight's session is all about getting started in Unreal Engine. We're going to be having a really exciting presentation, and we're joined by Gnomon alumni Eric Roin. Eric is currently the Unreal Engine lead at Paramount Pictures and also teaches our Introduction to Unreal course here at Gnomon. If you enjoyed tonight's demo, it's a great next step in continuing to learn with him in a more structured way in a hands-on setting. We'll also be sending a discount code to registered attendees over the next few days that can be used towards our summer Unreal Engine course with Eric. Registration opens May 28th. And as always, we want to thank our event sponsors, Dell and NVIDIA, for their continued support of our community and those industry events. So tonight, Eric will be building a Resident Evil themed environment as he demos in Unreal. As he goes along, please drop your questions in the chat. We want this to be feel interactive, so we want to get your questions answered in real time. As we have a chance, I'll be able to interject and bring things up as he's working along. A couple of notes before we bring Eric on. If you need closed captioning, please visit the Gnomon YouTube or Facebook channels. And if you have questions about Gnomon or how to get started in the full-time program or summer camp or individual courses, please reach out to admissions@gnomon.edu. So now, without further ado, I'd like to bring on Eric, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hello. Hey, everyone. Thank you, Anton, and everyone at Noma team for bringing me on. It's definitely an honor to be here. I've been watching all the previous live streams, and now I get a chance to lead my own, which is great to have. Just making sure the audio and everything is okay. Can you guys hear me? Well, all good, cool. Thank you. Yeah. So my name is Eric Roin. I'm currently an Unreal Engine lead at Paramount Pictures. It is a film company. We mostly specialize in commercials and internal shows for Paramount. But my background started in video games. I'll be sharing, briefly about myself, my experience. What some of the titles I worked on are Marvel Midnight Suns. It's a strategy Marvel game, Mortal Kombat games, and I also worked in previs and wrote through other departments throughout my career. And kind of went a full circle because I am also a Gnomon grad, so I went through a full program here, and now I also get to teach at the school that I went to, so it's a great way to give back and be more involved as well by doing streams, teaching, or just being in touch with the community. It's a very um, welcoming environment. Most of my friends that I made are from school. Probably some of you are watching now. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So I'll share my portfolio just quickly to kind of give you an idea of uh, what I'm working on, and I'm also going to share the asset packs that we're going to be using for this demo. We've been given the opportunity to use them, and it's really high quality assets. So definitely give credit to all the artists, and then we'll dive into Unreal. As far as specialty today's demo, it's mostly going to be for beginners or maybe for someone who already had prior experience with different game engine and just wants to explore how Unreal works. If you already have any kind of 3D background, great. Or if you're an advanced Unreal user, maybe you'll pick up a few hints. We're going to be specifically focusing on lighting, environment creation, and just talking about small tips and tricks as we go throughout. So with that said, I'm going to share my screen, talk about myself, and we'll get right into the demo. Okay. Cool. So this is my current art station. I probably need to update it, but as far as some of the recent stuff that I did, I worked on Marvel Midnight Suns. You might be familiar with the company 2K, and the studio is Firaxis Games. They're known mostly for strategy games, so XCOM, Civilization strategy games where you build your own empire type of thing. And they partnered with Marvel, which was a great IP to work on. And my job primarily here was to do cinematic lighting. So I was giving finished cutscenes with already animation and VFX and everything that makes a cutscene. And my job there was to look through those shots and essentially light them in a way that um, bring up the character to its fullest, making sure that they can read well. Especially with this game, there was a lot of dark theme environments, and it was really crucial to kind of get the characters to read nicely. We were using Unreal 4 back then, as you can see. Um, Other examples of level lighting, a couple months in, I also was moved on to do gameplay lighting, which is definitely different than cinematic. But when I mean cinematic, I really mean in-game cinematics. So none of these shots are pre-rendered or anything like that. These are all screenshots from the game. And it was a big team effort. Obviously, I didn't do it by myself. We had a great team there, and um, our cinematic director, Chris, was leading that and giving me a lot of feedback and notes, and I was able to really grow at that job and learn more about not just visual aspects of lighting, but also technical aspects, stuff like optimization and performance. And I think that's what really helped me kind of, uh, go and push through my career as well. Some more examples of in-game lighting. Again, with such a big IP, you want to be really crucial of how you portray the characters, making sure their colors are staying accurate, making sure they're readable, compelling. If the cinematic's supposed to eject specific emotion, you want to bring that up and you really show your best. Um, Especially when it comes to lighting, I think it's a big responsibility because essentially you're pretty close to the end of the pipeline. People work super hard to do their models, textures, animations, VFX, and great lighting can only enhance that. But if lighting struggles, then all that work kind of gets scrapped. So I think it's a big responsibility, but also a really enjoyable process, in my opinion. Some more examples, essentially, of in-game screenshots. Cool. And before that, I also briefly worked on Mortal Kombat games. This was actually using Unreal Engine 3. This was targeted for mobile, and I worked alongside with Chris and Zachary on this. We had our own, lighting team at Frame Machine, so we were responsible for lighting these environments. All in engine definitely was really big challenge to get it to run for mobile platforms. But again, Unreal is being used, not just for AAA games, mobile VR experiences. So it's a really big niche when it comes to working with the engine. Again, some in-game lighting examples, and before that, one of the biggest projects I worked earlier on in my career was Obi-Wan Kenobi, and that was definitely an eye-opening experience for me. And I really want to be clear, especially with projects like this. My contributions are really small. For this set, I was maybe laying out some lights here and there, um, fixing materials, textures. These are all final images, final renders from the actual TV show. But our job was essentially to make those environments and be a bridge between previs and final pixel. Some of these environments were using LED walls, some of these environments were using green screen. Um, and our job was to get the concepts, all the great ideas from the art directors there, concept artists, 3D modelers, and then put it together in Unreal. This was back at, I think, early 2020, so Unreal wasn't even that popular, especially for film. So it was a big challenge to kind of, translate all of that detail in there. And sometimes Unreal is also being used for practical previs. If you have a director that you're working with and they're working with a practical space, maybe that environment doesn't need any kind of VFX at all. It still can be utilized in a sense where you build out an environment in Unreal, right? Like in this case, you can build it or any software at that point, and you can visualize the space and see how big it is. See your place your cameras. You can go into VR headset, and especially directors that like the 3D aspect really enjoy that kind of thing because that helps them not only save time, save budget. Building in 3D can be expensive, but building practically can be dramatically more expensive. So sometimes it's a good point for directors to go in and use game engines to previs their environments, even though they're not using any kind of VFX. Obviously, in this case, all the backgrounds are CG, and then actors and all that are all practical. And it was a great project. I made some friends there. Even had my name in the credits, which was really um, cool to see. But so many people touched these shots. My contributions were just mostly focusing on asset layout, materials, and then just some troubleshooting in the engine as well. That kind of summarizes, my overall experience. And before that, my background really started off in 2D. I was working in primarily Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, and I never really knew 3D before I got to Nomen. And I was able to have a somewhat of a decent career just being a 2D artist. I had a fine art background, and at some point I ended up working at the newspaper here in downtown LA. And it was a great job early on, but it was very repetitive, and I wanted to do something bigger. Um, and I had to quit that job with my 2 weeks, and I applied to go through school to Nomen, got in, and then took a leap of faith, got through the full program. And it was funny because when I was leaving that job, my boss told me, "Well, if you're leaving to study, maybe one day I'll see your name on the bigger screens," and that actually happened. So um, a little bit of motivation for everyone here. Yep, that's roughly my experience. You guys are welcome to check out um, my LinkedIn or check out more of my ArtStation. For those of you who are interested, hopefully I'll be able to update some of the current stuff we work at Paramount. But a lot of it is still under NDA. But we are definitely heavily utilized Unreal Engine daily there, and it'll be nice to share that at some point in the future. Cool. So what I want to do next is give a credit to people that provided assets for today's stream. It's really important to credit other people's work, and I want to be clear: all the assets I'm going to be showing you guys are provided by other really talented people, and my focus is primarily um, lighting those and getting them set up in the scene, and just using them, in Unreal environment. So the company that provided the assets for today's stream is called Big Medium Small, and they're probably one of the highest quality assets that I've seen for sale. And there's different kits that made by different people. So yeah, you guys welcome to check it out. I'm sure you'll probably be able to put that in the comments as well. But specifically today, we're going to be using the Tokyo Black Alleys build. So you can see it has a whole bunch of um, very high quality buildings. Everything is modular, optimized for engine, bunch of characters. And it was made by talented artist Michael Toshimura. We'll probably provide the links as well, but you guys are welcome to check him out. He does some great work and really is inspiring. I believe he has a background in architecture, and it really shows how he can able to translate those assets and make them work. Another pack we're going to be using today is Infected pack. Um, these does not have a credit of an artist to it, so I'm not really sure who to credit, but I believe it was probably made by Jama Drabayev, um, who also was able to provide access to all of these for us today. And finally, we're going to be using this cyberpunk environment that was made see, by Matt Alsop. You guys are welcome to check out his stuff. He worked on some Mandalorian, Star Wars as well, Rogue One, Force Awakens. So he definitely um, has a great experience to bring in. And I was lucky enough to get a hold of these assets so we can use it for the stream. Again, really high quality, modular, kind of like Blade Runner type of environment. Cool. So we got with that stuff out the way. We talked about my portfolio, my background, and let's get right into Unreal. So I did prepare a little scene for us today, and you might already be guessing, what is that going to cover today? We mentioned Resident Evil, and I just want to briefly talk about the idea of how I came up um, for this idea for the stream. I've recently been playing Resident Evil Requiem, and I'm just a really big fan of their games in general, especially Resident Village, and then Resident Evil 7 as well. And the latest one is set in US, Requiem, but I wanted to imagine what it would be like if that was set with modern graphics and all of that, set in Japan. I never personally been to Japan, so this is my way of traveling and combining also. Obviously, Resident Evil has a bunch of zombies in there. It's a horror game, so using some kind of crowds or zombies to add to our environment, and also adding a cyberpunk element. I know that might sound a bit confusing. Why are you merging so many different genres? But I've never seen anything that like that. And one way to see it is to make it yourself. So I figured it'll be kind of nice to merge those words together because I'm also a big fan of sci-fi, anything that has to do with cyberpunk. And to be honest, I just couldn't really make a decision, so I wanted to combine it all. Um, and also, that will help us to kind of browse and see how different artists, the ones we just mentioned, use Unreal and how they build shaders, how they build materials. Um, it's really nice to execute it, and hopefully that gives you some ideas for your own personal work or professional work, because I'm sure we have some professionals that attend the streams as well, which is always great. Um, cool. Let me briefly check the comments. Okay, some of you guys were asking for the links. Seems like the links were provided, so we should be good to go. Cool. All right. Thank you all. All right, let's get going. So, for a while, I was blocking out my environments in Maya, and that was, traditional way of doing things. You get a concept, you try to recreate that in Maya as much as possible, and Maya is still heavily used at our studio as well. But specifically for Unreal, I've been also trying to um, use some of their native tools. And the reason for that is that it can be very time consuming whenever it's Maya, Blender, 3ds Max, whatever software of your choice, to go for the full cycle, right? You do a blockout, you do a playtest, that blockout feels too small or too big, or whatever the case is, and you have to go back to the other software, export it, and that can be really, really time consuming process. So I want to kind of and I don't really see too many people use those tools, so I want to kind of expose them, and hopefully you guys, have a chance to use them as well, or maybe if you have experience using them, let us know. Um, so the tool that I'm primarily used to block out the space, was inside of modeling toolkit. Actually, before we get into that, I'm sure a lot of you guys already have Unreal experience, but I just want to walk you through my UI. That way we're on the same page. So usually I prefer to use Unreal 4 Classic Layout. So if I go to Window, Load Layout, Unreal 4 Classic Layout, it sets my space here, and it's just a lot more approachable UI, especially if you're just getting started. Um, Unreal 5's default layout gives you a very giant viewport and not too many menus. And another thing I use is Window, Levels, and that way I have all my stuff organized. I know they are using also Level Partitioner. I personally prefer a Levels workflow, just a lot more straightforward and I think less troubleshooting. Um, Also allows you to version out more, and unless you're working on a super big, open world game, I think Levels is still the way to go. Um, cool. And as far as my UI here, I have my content browser, I have my outliner, and again, if there's any questions at any point, you guys are welcome to chime in. I really want to show what I did, but also make sure that for those who are just getting started, this is a easy experience and hopefully gives you some inspiration to try it out. I know Unreal can seem intimidating at first if you never used it or just getting started with it, but just like any software, uh, the worst thing that can happen is your file gets corrupted or some references break, and that's not a big deal. We can always fix those things. Um, and software is made to be broken, tested, especially if you're a student and just getting started. Cool. So the idea behind this space is that I wanted to block out some sort of alley, inspired by Tokyo. Here's some of the references that I was looking at. I'm gonna pull up my PureF. Um, I was really inspired how dense Tokyo can be. Some of the concept artwork, um, even like old school concept art, which is really impressive. Um, and like I was saying, yeah, I've never been myself, and think it will be a great place to check out. You can see this is almost like very painterly, like the shadows and how the light hits all the environments. So obviously, some of these are maybe probably edited. This seems like a raw image, which is pretty cool. And this is just me playing Resident Evil. So this screenshots I just took in the game. I think especially when you're getting without any spoilers. So this is early in the game, so don't feel like there's any spoilers. These are concept art, and another reason that I really like them is that they go an extra mile. The developers of these games to provide concept artists, concept art, 3D models that you can spin around same way you would do on like ArtStation and whatnot. Um, so I think it's always cool how they give you that additional resources when you play the games, and those things unlock as you play it. So I think it's kind of fun to finish the map and then browse the 3D models. I'm sure for those of you who are character artists, you guys will probably spend hours just browsing the models, which can be really impressive. You can see some of the quality that can be achieved in game. Games came definitely a long way and only improving. Um, I was kind of inspired by this like dark, moody environment, and mixing that with some of the neon colors that I saw, in Tokyo references. That was roughly my idea that I had. And primarily, I really blocked it out super quick, maybe within 30 minutes to an hour, without having to rely on any other software. So I was going inside of the modeling toolkit, and I made my own folder structure for today's stream. And instead of blockouts, all I did is just this is literally all I'm using. I used one piece for the sidewalk, one piece for the floor, cubes. It's really easy to make new shapes. If your blockout requires you to have, let's say, staircase, and you don't want to go to Blender or Maya to do that, you can just drop in the stairs. Change the number of steps, change the width of those stairs, and so forth. And it can be really, really fast, especially if you're short for time. Cool. And then once you create and happy with that shape, let's make those stairs a bit taller. Once you're happy with that shape, you just press accept, and it gets fed right into your outliner. So now you can utilize this not just once, but many times throughout your projects. And the cool thing about this is that it's all instance based, right? So if you have multiple stairs, you can still take them and export them to Maya or Blender, model them out, do the proper UV topology, all those things that take a lot of time uh, to do it properly, and then bring them back and just replace your stairs. So I think that's what's really the biggest benefit of doing your blockouts in Unreal. Now, furthermore, if I just press play here, I'm able to walk around my scene, right? So I can roughly see the pacing, and obviously it all depends on your animation, how fast your character goes. But I was thinking that maybe between this alley, player has some kind of encounter, and maybe there's another objective or boss fight that player sees. So I was thinking that it will be interesting to combine and give a player a choice essentially, right? Maybe go through the crowds of zombies or encounter the boss fight, and then they have to essentially decide for themselves. It's always great when games give you a choice, even if that choice seems like it's an illusion. I personally really enjoy when games do that. So after blocking out, obviously our stream is limited, so I spent some time bringing in the final assets, the ones that I mentioned. So let me show you how that turned out. And I want to be clear, so lighting is not done at all. This is what we're going to be focusing on today. So if you look at it and you see, oh, this is horrible lighting, that's basically the whole idea, is that I want to show you how we can take um, the basic directional light, improve on it, and really make the assets show their best, especially with such great assets that I was giving. Um, let me see here. Cool. Just checking chats. Yeah, SM stands for just static mesh. Thank you for bringing it up. Usually naming convention, just super quick. Um, the reason you want to name them properly is just for sake of organization. But also, if I go to content and I just type in SM underscore, now all the static meshes can show up in my scene, a whole bunch of characters, environments. So it's really easy to essentially search those and use those prefixes. If I type in M underscore, a lot of materials are going to show up. Textures, T, um, for textures, some of those conventions. So you guys can also use filters, which is super helpful. You can click here and filter on exactly what you want to look at. Materials, meshes, whatever, and you can always reset them. Cool. let's continue on. So let's check out how my blockout turned into a bit more of final topology. So I started off with just putting basic assets for the street, as you can see here, and then this is me combining multiple packs. But I was thinking, some kind of flow, traffic, maybe a narrow street that feels like it's the right scale. Um, so what I'm doing here is I'm making sure that my levels are loaded in game, right-clicking, changing the way that they stream from blueprint to always loaded, which now if I go back and press play, I can actually see them in game. And again, test it out. I was like, okay, that's not looking, too bad. We have some kind of a street environment, a bit of a blocks in there. And I really wanted to have some kind of encounter here. So I just put some sort of subway metro entrance. I was playing a lot of Arc Raiders, and then they have that extraction point. So I was kind of inspired by that as well. And just adding some kind of buildings, seeing out how the scales feels, moving my block out. I'm able, to work with both. I can move the block out around, and I can also move my some of the higher topology pretty quickly, and while still keeping a pretty decent frame rate. Cool. Next, I wanted to introduce some of the buildings. So I'm going to click here under Hero Buildings, and as you can see, some of the buildings show up. Let's go ahead and check them out in the play mode. Um, Again, especially if you're working in games, you always want to check it from the player's perspective. It's a luxury of having a locked camera for film or TV shows, but in games, you don't control where the player goes, or at least to a specific extent. So it's really important to kind of look at your scenes all the way around and making sure that the player doesn't break their experience or nothing really throws them off. Because, just like with any idea behind any video game, is that we want to keep the player engaged as much as possible for as long as amount of time as possible. And having those things that can throw you off can really leave a bad impression and essentially have the potential player leave the game and never come back. So if I press play, you should see the buildings show up, and just looking in the amount of details, you can see they're super detailed, and then have emissive materials. So they also have some light sources in there, but I went ahead and toned them down just so we can focus on the lighting as a part of the lecture today. Also adding just some scale figures for this sense of scale. Then I start adding more and more backgrounds and essentially filling in my space. So you can see my level step is basically like layers in Photoshop. You can hide and then hide stuff on pretty quickly. So let me show the background, buildings, level. It's always nice to separate your foreground elements background in case your scene gets really heavy or maybe graphics card cannot support so many assets if they're too detailed. You can kind of control your performance. If you press Control Shift H, you'll see this is roughly my frames. I might not have the latest and greatest machine, but I believe I'm on the 4070 card, and that still holds up, pretty well, even with so many geometry in there. Cool. So I'm gonna go ahead and hide my building next. Uh, mhm, hide the blockout. So I'm going to right click, change trimming method, set it to blueprint, and now if I press play, see how the blackout is completely gone. A lot of you guys are asking how the assets are being compared. Well, KitBash 3D is also a great resource. I personally also used it. Um, so I think they hold up pretty well. It really just depends. It's hard to compare apples to apples because it's all just depends on the artists that made them, right? They all made by different artists. I think both companies are great. Um, and RAM, I have 32 gigs of RAM, and RAM is really expensive now. So I was hoping to upgrade it to 64. If you are just building out a PC, definitely try to go for 64 if it's possible. I know it's really expensive with all the AI and then programming in jumping, but if there's a way to get that, um, cool. Um, this will be less of interactive experience. Part of the reason that I'm playing the game is that I just want to see how it's laid out. We won't have time to get into any of the interactions, so I'm going to just be focusing on one angle essentially through the either camera or the player angle. Cool. All right, so this is roughly my setup. As you can see, I went ahead and colorized my folders, so you can actually give it a color. If you right click on a given folder, for example, this stream for today, I went right click, set color. I can give it some kind of color, just made it like normal green. And that's very easy to navigate. Maybe you have specific colors that represent, geometry, specific colors that represent materials. Geometry usually blue, materials are usually green, but you can make any colors you want. And especially as the content browser gets really busy and heavy, it's a great way to kind of navigate and move stuff around quickly. What you can also do is you can make your folders be favorites. So this is the folder I built for today's stream. You can right click and add to favorites. And now this folder is always accessible to me. Okay. Um, cool. So let's dive into actually lighting the scene. I'm going to go into my outliner and only show you the light sources so you can actually see the light sources that I'm adding. So if you are following along or taking notes or whatever, it'll be easier for you to you know, recreate that later on. And I'm not going to be using any kind of custom blueprints or external assets for my light sources. There's a lot of great resources out there, but the best way to learn it and the best way I actually prefer to work myself is to build your lighting completely from scratch. And that way you have a full authority and full control of your scenes. Um, cool. So I'm going to click on this gear icon and then select only in current level. That way, whichever sublevel I have selected is going to reflect that into my outliner. So let's double click on the lighting level. As you can see, I only have a directional light in here. And let's also set up some kind of camera. So we can just pick a shot together that we like, and essentially go from there. I'm going to hide my blockout level and right click, make a new folder. I like to give them numbers so it's easier to kind of navigate through them. And inside the scene folder, you're going to right click here and make a sequence. So we'll just call it shot 10. It's our first shot. And part of the reason that I left this alone is that I really wanted to kind of show you my workflow and, see you guys recreate it instead of just going back to it. So obviously there's going to be some back and forth. I'm going to be trying out different angles and seeing what works, but it's also a important part that I think needs to be shown. Nothing works just right out of the box. It's always a lot of trial and error. Um, so I'm going to click here to make a new camera. And drop it in here. And as you can see, we already have a lot of really nice examples that we can go for. This is literally can be a nice camera shot. Right? This can be camera shot here. And camera heavily depends on two things: your focus settings and your focal length. Obviously, your physical camera, the real cameras are limited by amount of lenses they can have. We all have phones, modern phones these days, and then they keep adding more and more cameras to our phones. And part of the reason why that happens is that no single lens can essentially show you all the range of the focal length. Right? As you can see here, me moving the focal length, that's increasing. But obviously, with the digital software, you don't have those limitations, so you can kind of set to any frame you like. And let me pull up my references on the right screen. So I'm constantly looking at the reference as well. You can see here. Yeah, there's so many angles. I'm just trying to see what shots can work, but I think something like this we can start off, and we can always change that. Again, I'm going to be looking at multiple angles. So I'm adding a keyframe to my camera, just so I can go back to it. Adding right-clicking and locking it so I don't accidentally move it. Let me do that. Um, hmm, Going to lock actor movement, and now my camera is locked. Cool. So let's go back to lighting. So I always start off with just really basics. Let me show you this is my lighting. So far, I have a directional light. So if I delete that light source, as you can see, there's just some neon lighting and nothing else. So usually what I do is I add what's called a post-process volume. Post-process volume essentially, for those of you who have editing background or any kind of color grading background, think of like DaVinci Resolve or After Effects or whatever. But for 3D, you can modify gamma, contrast, saturation, all the things that might be familiar to you in other softwares, but now in the 3D space. And post-process volume can also make the area feel unique, right? So if you have like a swimming pool and the player dives into the swimming pool, you want to make that area blue. That can be also post-process or what's called the color collection for the game engine. I'm going to type in exposure, set that to be manual, and set my exposure compensation to 10. Again, I'm going to be moving rather quickly because I do want to get to the lighting part. But hopefully the recording is available for everyone to watch later, so you guys can go back to it and rewatch it. But I'm going to be kind of picking up the pace here a little bit more. Cool. And then one thing to make sure is to set your post process to be infinite or unbound. That way it affects your entire scene. And you can see here right away, me adjusting the exposure already worked. I can go between different exposure points. And essentially what we're looking for here is exposure that is not too dark, that we can still see some detail, but not um, too overexposed where all the neon signs are getting lost. And, it's kind of hard to go from that point. So maybe around 8 or so. It looks pretty dark right now, but there's basically no lights just yet. Next, I'm going to add a directional light here. Just typing in the place actors directional light. Directional light is basically Unreal skylight. Sunlight. So if you press Control L, you can move the light source around, and we can really start hunting for the angles that we think work for us. Now, as far as time of day, I'm thinking to recreate somewhat of a nighttime scene. There's just so much neon lighting happening, and you might be curious, well, why do we need a directional light if we're recreating a nighttime scene? But the idea behind this is that your directional light can also act like a moonlight. So if I go in back to my directional light, give it a bit of a blue. Make sure to set your lights to movable. Um, I'm going to be less concerned about the performance. They're still pretty performant, and especially if your game has a dynamic day and night cycle. Most of the companies are switching to dynamic lighting. I know bake lighting is still big, especially in mobile games or VR games, but I'm going to be relying on dynamic lighting. If you're not sure what those mean, just look into bake lighting versus dynamic lighting. Some studios also use hybrid approach, but I'm going to be using fully dynamic lighting and relying essentially on lumen for most of the lighting work. Um, cool. And then I'm just really making it really, really low and subtle, and primarily going to be relying on um, skylight. So I'm going to drop in the skylight. Now, skylight is going to allow us to give reflections. So I can set it to be movable, and we can try out different ways you can light. So you can use a capture scene, or you can use an HDRI. Let's try a capture scene and add some clouds. And every time you're using a real-time capture, you do need a sky atmosphere. Those things are essentially connected. So I'm going to drop in the sky atmosphere. And if I exit out of my camera, see we have some kind of dark lighting happening. And environments like this, if I press Alt 3, we can still see it in unlit mode. So there's still a lot of detail in there. And you're primarily going to be relying on just local lighting to get the read. And then overall environment lighting can be really, really subtle. This allows essentially to guide the player's eye and have a full control of where the focal points are and where the player is going. Uh, Now that I'm looking at this, I really like this camera angle here, especially with the dark lighting. Again, notice how my um, decisions are always changing depending on what I'm looking at, depending what kind of lighting scenario I'm looking at. So I'm going to go inside of the camera and let's unlock it. So we can go back here, select our camera actor, right click and unlock it. And let's set up a new point, maybe somewhere here. And we can see how that looks like later. And I'm also going to press play and just roughly see, how that's looking. So some of the things we're noticing, obviously, it's way too dark. Neon lights are reading pretty well. Nothing is overexposed. You can clearly see how things are structured. We do have some kind of sky in there. And sure, there's a lot of blueprints that allow you to have a sky made more easily. And they're great, but part of the reason that I want to make this stream is I want to really show just vanilla tools. And they come with their own gotchas. But you can see they're getting some reflection on the ground, which is nice. The materials start to read pretty well. Before it was like very flatly and evenly lit. Let's see here. Pressing Alt 4 to move it around. Let's keyframe that. I like to keyframe my camera so I can essentially go back and look at the different angles or even potentially animate it later. Right? Maybe not at such a fast speed, but right. Now let's go back to our regular mode and I'm going to go and let's also take a picture of where we're getting started. That way we can kind of compare it and see before and after. So I'm going to, just for the sake of my own, press F9, take a screenshot, and you can see that I'm going to drop in the screenshot here. So this is basically kind of like our starting point for now. Cool. And next, let's step back from the camera and really look at the environment and see how we can add lighting locally. It's really not to the best benefit to light only for camera, especially if you're lighting for video games, because you might think, well, if it's a game cinematic, why does it matter to light it all properly? Well, decisions can make, animations can change. Maybe the user or the player has multiple ending in their game, so you want to make sure that you account for different parts of the environment, right? So even though it's cinematics, you still want to plan for those things. So some of the easy things to do here, we can see there's a big neon sign, which is most likely the focal point, right? Maybe there's extraction point or some kind of objective here, or maybe there's an enemy coming out. So we'll try different options. So I'm going to search for rect light. Rect light is great for anything that essentially is squarish shape. I have my lighting sublevel selected. I'm going to drop in the rect light and rotate it around. And I know all these materials have emissive properties, and your first instinct might be to go in and blast those emissive properties. The problem with that is that you're going to get a lot of noise in your scenes. So whenever I have an emissive object, I still actually add the light source, and I only use emission for you know just some art direction, not necessarily as a light source. Even though Epic Games advertises that and they do show it in their tutorials, I prefer to just work with rectangular lights or spotlights, and whatever the case is. I'm gonna set my light to be movable, and try different intensities and see how that looks. I'm going to click on the light color. We can match that to a specific color of the sign. Again, looking for just more of a brighter points. See, maybe roughly here, and then I'm going to go in and just increase that intensity. So I'm still staying within the same color range, just a lot more intense. And now we can go in and make the light fit roughly the placement of that. Notice how that's changing. Bigger light sources give you softer shadows, so we can have some kind of an entry point here. Check it out on the camera. Okay, cool. And Next, I'm going to mess with my directional light. So pressing Control L and seeing how can we move our moonlight to create that kind of more moodier atmosphere. And one thing you want to avoid when lighting is getting anything front lit. It will make it feel very flat. So I'm always going some kind of angle. That feels pretty good. Let's see. Um, Okay, cool. And now we can go in and maybe increase a bit of intensity. Let me see here. Maybe around 1. You can see how even adding that single light source, if I hide this, see how much better the materials read. We're getting all that detail just from the light source. So it's our job as lighting artists to really make our environment stand out and read. Let's continue on. I'm going to be adding some more signs. Now, we're not really seeing inside of this space, but I was thinking maybe we add some kind of a point light. And my goal here is to kind of demonstrate you different lights so you can see their use cases. Adding a point light in here, uh, and we're going to notice we don't have any fog in the scene, any clouds. You're going to get to that way later. Right now, I'm just thinking almost like I'm painting. I'm painting just the main focal points first, and then all that extra stuff can come in way later. Let's increase that point light and check it out from the camera. Okay, that's not starts to get a bit interesting here. Maybe inside of it, we're kind of hinting maybe there's some kind of a danger, whatnot. Um, Adding just a bit of not going full on red, then kind of hinting that this color is a bit unusual for the environment. There's a lot of more saturated colors in here. Now notice the reflection feels a bit too strong. It definitely is a dead giveaway. How you see how that reflection is super shiny, and it's fine to have if we actually have a light source in there. But if you don't, we can always just fake it and mess with what's called a source radius. So as I increase this, the reflection is going to get softer. And then we can mess with soft source radius to also soften that reflection. Now I'm basically using this as a local fill light and not necessarily getting into any reflections. Cool. Let's see if you have any questions. How do you set the exposure if you don't have neon lights as well? So that's a good point. Let's talk about this briefly. So ideally, I would prefer my exposure to always be set around 10. So if I go to my post process, set to exposure, make sure to set it to manual. Otherwise, it's going to auto expose. And auto exposure is good when it's needed, especially for like competitive games where you want to make sure the players sees exactly what they can in dark environment or light environment. Maybe players are going in and out from bright sources um, to darker sources. Basically, auto exposure is recreating human eye, how our eyes, the pupils change depending on um, the light that they're seeing. I prefer manual because manual is going to be consistent throughout, and we can use lighting to essentially drive it. Um, so I would usually um, set the value to manual and 10. I'm just dropping it down a little bit just so you can see a bit more of the neon lights. Um, mhm. Do you ever set down the specular scale on lights? Really rarely. Most of the time, I think that kind of breaks PBR a little bit, and I try to keep the specular intact. And I usually just adjust the size of the light. So bigger lights will give you softer shadows, and then smaller lights will give you a lot harsher shadows. Right, let's continue on. So we have this environment here. Now let's check out this building and then see if there's a way we can um, mess with the material and maybe increase it a bit more so it kind of starts to come up um, with some more blue. And I'm still pretty new to this assets. I just got them before the stream. So there might be a ways that I'm doing something wrong, or maybe artists blend it a different way. I'm just kind of trying it out and getting that first experience. I didn't spend more than a few hours, and part of it is I want to show you guys kind of my actual, authentic process when it comes to that. Cool. So if this is a blueprint, so all these are essentially combined, and sometimes blueprints will expose things. For example, light intensity. I can try to mess with that and then see what happens. Light intensity. And we can also just type in light to kind of see what that looks like. Okay, so we're getting a lot of lighting from both materials and just emissive windows. Let's check out how they make it. Now, unfortunate part of Unreal is whenever you're dealing with very fine surfaces, it's going to start to flicker like that. And we're going to talk about some lumen settings and the ways to improve this. But most of the time, if you are seeing stuff further away, um, I would just rely on like a texture. Obviously, geometry is going to give you the best quality, and we'll try to solve it. But for now, I'm just going to stay, with what it is. And notice these light sources, just so you know how they're structured. Let's open up the blueprint and take a look. Essentially, this is the building we have in here. And they're using primarily rectangular light. So it's a very similar light source that I showed in here, kind of being the interior. Now I'm going to go in and set these lights to movable. I know it can be expensive in terms of performance, but it should give us a more authentic shadows. Remember before it was set to static and it was kind of like showing some previews. And I'm sure it was partially set for optimization purposes. Let's see. Also, if you disable light source and you set it to 0, it actually will affect your performance. Even if the light source is present, but it's set to 0, it's not going to slow you down. So this is one way you can also optimize things and then just disable lights that might not be needed or maybe not seen from that angle specifically. Make sure to compile your blueprint. There's the lights. Just checking them out. I want to set them to be movable. Save. Now, the idea behind blueprints is you want to essentially modify um, the actual assets in here and only go in here when you're making like a big enough change, right? That way you can have different versions of the buildings, different instances of those buildings. Let's see what that looks like now. Okay, that doesn't look so bad. Great. And next, I really want to find a way to bring out this blue emissive light. So let's try to find a way to find it. I'm going to go to content browser. Let's make sure we actually save. It'll be unfortunate if Unreal crashes. It does like to do so sometimes. Control Shift S to save, or we can just save all to save all the changes. I'm going to go to content, and another quick tip: if you press Control B, it's going to take you directly to that asset in the content browser. So I don't have to search for things, especially this quickly on. And let's see, in terms of geometry, I'm just kind of going through it, seeing what materials I have. Mm. So this is a material instance. The idea behind the instance is that you can modify essentially the child and parent relationship. Child inherits properties from the parent. Child can be changed independently, or mostly referred to as MI for material instance and master material, usually called MM. So knowing those things, I'm essentially able to kind of predict the change. Did that work for us? Let's see. So I'm going to go back and forth, A and B. And I'm mostly trying to use one screen. Usually I will be working on two screens, but for the sake of the stream, I want you guys to see exactly what I'm doing, even if it's might feel a bit overwhelming. 1, back to 10. Yeah, so I think 10 in this case works pretty well. Maybe even 15. I wouldn't worry about being too accurate with these numbers. These numbers can be arbitrary, as it all just depends on your texture and your emissive property. So let's not worry about that too much. I think the lighting from these windows starts to feel a bit too intense. So let's go back to it. And we have upper floor light intensity. Yeah, you can see now setting it to 0. Let's try maybe 2000, 1000. See what the mission amount is doing. It's probably mostly for interiors. I'm not really seeing it from this angle. Okay, so I think that starts to feel a bit more natural. I'm not getting too much of a flickering either. Let's see. Okay. Just checking the chat, making sure you guys don't have any questions. Okay. All right, so building is looking good. Let's see what else we have in the scene. Pressing Alt 4 to kind of preview, or Alt 3 and Alt 4 to go back and forth. Or you can also change your lit modes here. And let's take a look at this building. I'm going to enable light sources here. And let's also see how those light sources are structured, so you guys get a better idea. Instead of me just clicking enable, I want you to see the setup, and maybe hopefully you can create it as well. Um, Pretty detailed in here. There's even an interior space. So it's just basically two rectangular lights. They have a different source width, so they're a bit longer to mimic that kind of longer shop shape. I'm not going to be getting into the settings of what other artists did, but I'm going to be showing you my own lights. I'm going to be adding them on top. That way, you guys can see some of the settings that I'm changing. Right now, I'm just kind of setting the mode, setting up emissive materials, and then we're going to go in and give it, more of our own lighting twist on that. Let's see here. Take a sip. Okay, cool. Let's continue on. Mhm. Now, if you notice this start to feel like they're almost merging into one, and it would be nice to see if there's a bit more of a separation from this building. So I'm gonna go in and drop in the spotlight, type in spotlights. So far we looked at rectangular light, point light for the tunnel, and then next I want to show you spotlights. I'm gonna set that spotlight to be movable. And the problem with spotlights is that it's all depends on the attenuation radius, or how far the light projects. Naturally, in real life, lights fade out pretty quickly. There's even a whole math behind how quickly the light source can fade out. Um, and that can be an advantage. That can help us make our lights feel more believable. But that can also be a disadvantage, where you constantly have to add more and more lights to achieve the same effect. So they'll definitely affect your performance. So you can see here, I'm kind of increasing it a little bit, but I'm mostly looking for just a way to give it some fill. And let's see here, almost like if I were to mimic moonlight. So let's actually demonstrate that. I know we have direction light, but you get a lot more control with local moonlights. I'm just gonna call it local moonlight. Select that. And the trick here is to disable the way that the light fades out. So if you type in inverse square fell off, essentially just a physics phenomenon, I'm going to turn that off. And now, let's keep it on, and I'm going to make it more obvious so it's easier for you to see. See how far this light goes, right? It reaches pretty far. And if I set it brighter, whatnot, it just fades out so quickly, right? Maybe it's pretty hot here, then it fades out. So if I show you the setting that I was just looking at, inverse square fall off, if I check that, it's the same light source, just gives us a lot more fall off. right? Inverse square fall off. It is under advanced settings. And now I can use this as my fake moonlight and essentially control it from there. You'll eventually increase your texture streaming pool size. Yes, so two ways to look at it. I'm definitely not going to increase the pool size now because it is going to affect my RAM, and I'm also streaming, so I'm sure that takes part of it. Um, there's two ways to go about this. If you're going for a pre-rendered cutscene or cinematic, actually you don't have to worry about that because movie render queue will take care of that. We're not going to get into that today, unfortunately, but look into movie render queue, specifically game overrides and custom console variables. You can force it to allocate more memory, um, or you can just put a console variable. But I'm not going to be doing it now because you'll might hinder the way that the stream is working. Um, sure, someone told you we look like the professor from Netflix show Money Heist. Oh, I believe I watched that show with the one with the glasses. Never heard that before, but I guess it's nice that he's also a professor, maybe slightly different industry. Um, cool. Looks like we're all caught up. Right, let's continue on. We're about halfway there. So I really want to show you guys as much as possible with the time we have. So I'm going to start decreasing that, and let's look at that from the camera. And now you see how that building is a lot more separated. It might be too bright now. We can go back and edit. Not a big deal. But the idea behind this is I don't have to go in and blast it with so many light sources just to separate it a little bit with, just to get some real lighting here. Now this feels a bit more separated. And we can also control the outer cone angle to kind of, expose. Let's say I don't want the back buildings to be affected, right? I just want a bit more of a fill. Um, right, it's actually not that bad. I'm thinking in terms of just like planes, making one plane a bit brighter, similar to kind of like this reference. Mm, Go back. Okay. Right. Let's maybe set it to 500. And again, unfortunately, lighting, whenever you like it or not, is just a lot of, oh, what was this value better or not? And going back and forth. Or same with practical lighting. I'm fortunate enough where I get to work with a lot of practical DPs for um, my my job, and then um, obviously I don't partake in that. We're mostly focusing on CG aspect of things, but seeing how people, whenever there's a cinematographer, DP, director of photography, director itself, gaffers, lighters, those are all physical and sometimes really intense jobs, how much effort they take into lighting their talent and scenes, even if it's a simple interview. It really puts things into perspective that, we just have to try even harder in CG to recreate some of those things and take the time to properly light it. A lot of the times, lighting gets kind of skipped on or pushed to the back, and it's really unfortunate, in my opinion. All right, so we got some more fill on that front building. Um, I'm going to be just throwing more and more light sources at you guys, so you start to see a bit of a repetition. So next, let's go over rectangular light um, and see how that looks like from mm, this menu here. Yes, you can see my memory is taking a load as more and more gigabytes is needed. And that might result in some textures being a bit blurry or muddy, but it's also probably partially because I'm streaming. Um, so I'm not really too worried about this console variable. I know it can happen pretty often, but as long as my textures show up, it doesn't really affect the look. Okay, so I have that window light placed. Let's try to mess with intensity. And you see how it gives us just a bit more of that kind of speck in there. So let's give it maybe some color that matches that. And this can be a window light. This can be a neon sign. So I went ahead and changed my focal point from 24 to 22. Small enough change, but I feel it starts to feel a bit more dynamic if I do that. Now there's still a lot of dark areas here, which I'm not a big fan of. So let's see if we can, without adding another light source, see if we can fix that. Also, bit of a fun and trippy thing, if you can actually fly the light source. So I have this local light. If I right click and go to pilot, I'm now basically a light source. I know it feels a bit weird because my rotation is probably off, but see how I'm like lighting with it? It's basically like a big flashlight. So the way I'm flying it around, and I can light the scene from all the angles. So just another quick, uh, starts to feel like a bit of like a horror game, no? If you think about it. But anyway, I'm gonna place it slightly different angle, mess with the outer cone angle, and now let's see what that looks like. Make sure to actually unpilot it, otherwise you're just gonna be a light source forever. So let's not be a light source. Go back to perspective and look to the camera. All right, and now we can go in and tone down the intensity. Yeah, I think that reads a lot better. And notice that now we start to get a bit of a nice contrast between this kind of like lighter blue and then a bit of a warm light. Nothing is peeking out too much. This area starts to feel a bit too dark here on the bottom of the. And notice how I'm going from bigger volumes to smaller and smaller volumes. Again, almost like painting. And hopefully, we have enough time to get into the character lighting as well, adding some zombies and stuff. But that was what I was planning about. Oh, so this is a very good and technical question. So, have you ever had to match real-world light source intensity in your projects? Any tips from using HDRI adaptation visualizer? Um, so my take is a bit different when it comes to matching real-life um, values. I think it can be impressive to know them and work with them, and but to me, it all comes down to whenever the environment looks good and works with the rest of the team. So just to kind of step away from this and give you an idea. Sure, maybe you are all for matching real value properties, and you want to make your directional light be 5,000 intensity, and drop down your exposure a lot, mimicking how human eye works. That's all great, but for individual projects and for research. But if you're working in the team and you're joining as lighting artist, maybe project is 3 years in, and your VFX artist is relying on their particles, explosion, and fire. They're relying on a specific range of exposure, and then you go in and then you start teaching them how to do their job. Like, okay, well, we should change it to this value, so we should make it physically accurate. They can break a lot of things. They can break VFX. They can really affect the skin shader. Um, I was on the project where the character pipeline got reworked halfway through all of my lighting work, and that was a big challenge because I was accounting for more of like a matte skin, and then the skin became really glossy. The characters did end up looking better, but I had to go in and rework all my lights, and that was basically someone else's department affecting our department. Um, and so to give you, going back to your question, is I do not personally use those values. I work with whatever values are established. We try to keep them consistently. That way, our exposure um, is set to 10. We know we can reuse the light sources. We can reuse the same kits, VFX. Otherwise, your moonlighting is going to be a different exposure. Your direction light is going to be different exposure, and you're constantly going to be playing a catch up, which I think is just in the production setting is really unstable way of approaching it. I know it was a really long answer, but to answer that question is I don't really use um, predefined measurements. My experience, contrast ratio. I actually haven't really looked into contrast ratio. EV range in terms of just auto exposure is mostly common for games, but we primarily are locking our exposure, and then you can change your post process depending on the time of day. So if your daytime requires different exposure, we can change your post process to have a different value. Uh, Processor and GPU. Mm, so here's you guys can kind of see my specs. My memory is, getting almost full. CPU I have i9. and memory I have 32 gigs of RAM and 4070 graphics card. All right, let's continue on. So we have this building here that I think is starts to look a bit too dark. Um, so let's just find a way to have either some kind of object that can be a light source. So let's take a look at that next. Um, oh, actually, while we look for that, another thing I want to show you, and hopefully this works on the stream because it is a pretty heavy process. I want to show you guys how you can combine multiple viewports at the same time. Um, for that, it's a plugin. It's a plugin called under plugins, palette, actor palette. It's a beta plugin, so hopefully it doesn't crash, but we're going to take the risk of using a beta plugin on the stream. Actor palette, and I'm going to go to window, tools, sorry, not window, tools, actor palette 1. And let's find the level that I want to use. In this case, Tokyo, maps, props, open level. Let's see if that works. Okay, cool. That actually worked. Again, you guys can see the name of the company that provided the assets. They really nicely took the time and laid them all out. Um, so what's happening here is I'm technically have two levels open at the same time. And this can be a really big time saver whenever you're browsing for things. This is what's called a zoo scene, usually, because everything is kind of like in a zoo, looking around. Or also a gym scene. Um, you know, a lot of artists skipping out on gym, but at least we have a gym here. I personally haven't been going for a while, but anyway, we have this scene object. I can just drop it in here and see how that links to viewports. Pretty impressive. Can be again a huge time saver. So if I'm looking for a light source or any kind of set decoration, let me demonstrate that one more time. Maybe I want to have a light source, one of these light sources here. I can drop it in. It essentially links my viewport. I don't have to go through a content browser or anything like that. Uh, what are your thoughts on AI in the state of industry right now? Yeah, that's definitely a big topic. That's probably requires a longer answer, so I just don't give you any kind of a BS answer. So I think we can keep that maybe for Q&A and then happy to talk about that more. Okay, so I'm adding this lamp in here, and then we can use another point light. So I'm going to search for point light and essentially drop it inside the lamp. So essentially, I'm coming out for practical examples for us that can happen pretty often. So another example is you have some kind of light source that you want to um, cast light from, and the problem is that this object is casting shadows. So we can do two things. We can first increase the intensity on the emission. Too much. Maybe like 5. Okay, and then I'm going to save this, go down and then search for cast shadows. I'm going to disable cast shadows. Usually want to keep it on, but you see how it gives me this kind of like weird artifact. So I'm going to disable that and see where's our point light. And for light source like this, I primarily would want to rely on the atmosphere, and we don't have any right now. So that takes us to our next point. Let's add some fog. So I'm going to search for fog and drop in the exponential height fog. Now this essentially allows to give some sort of depth. We'll get back to this light in just a minute. I'm just kind of setting up all the things we need. And as you can see, the more denser it is, the foggy it becomes. Now, by default, you can see that the building in the background reads a lot better now, right? Before and after, before and after. Just kind of sets in space. some of the earliest examples of fog in video games was actually in Silent Hill, and it was interesting because they used it for sake of optimization. They made the fog be so dense that they only have to render so many objects at the same time, and that was essentially both a technical limitation and the art direction choice, and that carried out to even modern games. All right, so I'm going to search for volumetric fog inside of the fog actor, and I'm going to start to pick up the space a little bit. Enable this, and yep, here's the magic happens. Essentially, everything is now reacting to our fog. It might be a bit too dense. We can control that per light. But see, before and after, this makes such a huge difference. And doesn't really take too much on performance, actually. So now I think it's definitely too dense. So let's mess with the scattering distribution. Set it back a little bit. Mm. Now, by default, this fog is going to be black. This matters more if you have a daytime and nighttime cycle in the game. But if you're only going for nighttime scenes, you're safe to change it. And we don't have to make it super bright, like this is, obviously an overkill. We can still keep it rather dark, but then infuse some color into that. Okay. Now, as you can see, the biggest kind of washing effect is coming from this light. I do like how this feels. This feels great, but this feels way too just overblown, right? Like a giant stadium light source. So now that we have a fog established in our scene, we can control the amount of how much each light is affecting the fog. That's going to be in this under same setting, volumetric. I'm going to set it to 0. And now this light does not have any effects, even though we have a fog in the scene already. Right, so now it's a bit more balanced in there. Let's get back to this. Okay, so things starts to look a bit more interesting. Let's see how we'll be doing with time. I want to make sure we have enough time to do Q&A. But I have this point light selected, and again, we're going back to it. Notice how I can control how much, oh, that's way too much, how much atmosphere this can be affecting. Right, so I'm not controlling my fog settings. I'm just controlling the amount of um, um, fog effect per light source. And I can also enable cast volumetric shadow, which is a great example for this, because now you can see how the fog essentially is being cut up by the shape of the object, right? So before and after, it respects a bit more surrounding area of that. Let's make sure that this is centered a bit better. And doesn't need to be such a large radius. And really, the way to optimize lighting is not to look at amount of lights, but consider the amount of lights that overlap. So I want to avoid overlap. I'm going to drop it down to maybe like 200, 100. 200 is good enough. Doesn't overlap too much. And let's give it a color. So go with this kind of like fun green. I can also eyedrop this maybe somewhere between those two. Too intense. So let's look at that again. Make sure that's aligned. Right, we're kind of like painting with light source. Now we have, we don't not even seeing that in shot. So let's reframe our camera a little bit more. We can change the focal length to again maybe 20. Let's actually maybe rotate the camera a little bit. I do like how 22 looks for focal length. The lower that number is, the more of a warped effect you're going to have. And the higher the number is, the more flat your image is going to look like. So let's just rotate it a little bit. Let's see. Maybe something like this, and we can key that, transform, and I think it's actually better if we slightly look up a little bit more, just for a composition. Lock that, and don't really like how that looks now. Try something else. yeah, I think that reads better because it kind of takes our eye away from the edge of the frame and then highlights it a little bit more. Um, this light starts to feel a bit too intense with the moonlight. Let's tone it down. 50. All right. Um, next thing we can add some just basic clouds, even though we're not really seeing them in the shot. It's nice to have, and they're also going to affect the reflections. Um, clouds is a whole different beast. We've had a bit more time going to that, but with the clouds specifically, it will take me just an hour to. It will take an entire stream just to go over the clouds. How to make them react to the light source can be pretty fun. You can make your clouds cast shadows. You can make your clouds react to directional light automatically depending on the angle. But that's something that I cover, in my class as well. We have a specific chapter just for lighting itself. All right, so I'm just gonna drop the clouds the way it is. Um, let's go back to our palette tool. It's still active, and I was, using it the entire time. Kept it open, didn't really affect our performance. Let's see if there's anything else we can add in here that can help us with the framing. Okay, let's drop that in. I kind of like how depressing the shadow feels, right? You can imagine living and then you have like a display light source hitting your apartment and there's a shadow blocking the way. So I think that's kind of a bit of a dystopian look. I'm gonna keep that for now. Let's see what else we can add. I'm not really concerned about set dressing too much. We can always add that later. I'm mostly looking for like bigger props right now. Mm. And now they can also be the light source that supports this blue light, the moonlight, or this can be just light source coming from here. All right, let's start adding some zombies and characters. I think that'll be just fun for you guys to check out. Um, and then we can go back to lighting. But I do like how it feels already, especially how it reacts to the fog. Hopefully, you guys be able to pick up some tricks. All right, so going back to my scene here, and I did prepare a little jump scare surprise for us. So stay tuned. So if I enable the crowd, we have these zombie characters running and chasing us, also creating some cool shadows. So let's try to drag them a bit forward. Again, also part of the asset pack, the infected pack. Each of these is its own character. Pretty detailed and definitely nice amount of variations. And I just want to be clear, we're not associated in any means with these artists. I truly like how they make things, and it's not some kind of a hidden ad or product placement. There's no affiliation. They're just kind enough to provide the assets, and I enjoyed using them. But there's no. I want to make that clear if anyone was curious. All right, so we have some zombies running out of our. Remember at the very beginning of the stream, um, we had that red sphere that was indicating the encounter, and that's basically what I was going for. Now let's talk about light channels. So we do have this light source that essentially fills the scene, but I want to give these zombies a bit more of a rim light. So let's make it full screen. I'm gonna press F9, screenshot this, and then put it into PureRef, where you can see the um, progress, just to kind of show you guys what's happening here. We came a long way in just 30 minutes. Yep, let's continue on. So we have a question about the class. I do have an in-person class that is mostly dedicated for um, you know students that are in the area, but I also have an online class depending on what the schedule allows, and that class is called Intro to Virtual Production. Um, I do cover Unreal for majority of that class, but it also focuses on some more of a practical sense of things. It's an online class, so we don't have access to camera or anything like that. But I do talk about um, green life compositing or how to use cine camera, or it's heavily focused on like camera sequencer and lighting as well. All right. Let's continue on. So I was talking about light channels, and I want to show you how they work. So my goal is to highlight the zombies without making it too obvious. So one way to do it is I can just duplicate the light source and keep increasing the value of that. The problem here, not only is going to get, it actually feels pretty cool though. I was going to put them on a separate channel, but now that I look at that. All right, I'm going to show you light channels for a different example. I do really like how this looks, just kind of like a happy accident. So I'm going to just take this one light source and then increase the intensity. Also, cool thing you can do with lights is specifically for rectangular light only, at least out of the box, you can feed it a source texture. Um, and it's different from IES lights. It's a separate parameter. But source texture will essentially give a light a color, almost like a gel or a filter. Let's see here if I can give it some kind of green. The bad thing that there's not really a way to filter them, just kind of random. But even this, like car wheels texture, right? This is the texture. I can use this as a way to, like, so if I increase this, and maybe let's go lower on the fog now that the light source becoming stronger. Let's also cast those volumetric shadows. Actually, not a big difference. Gonna keep it off. If it's not changing the look dramatically, then we can keep it off. Um, and now this light essentially has a texture. So just to demonstrate that a bit better, if I were to take this light and then really take it close to the ground, you see how that car wheel texture is basically appearing here. So that's like feeding our light source. Um, do recommend intro online class as a first class. If you don't have prior needle experience, that's totally a good class to take. And I had students come from different backgrounds. We had a jewelry designer come in. We had people that work with motion capture come in. And if you're interested to kind of see what people are making, I always reshare my student work on LinkedIn, so you can check it out and see stuff that people are sharing. I always try to kind of support my students and share their work. Okay. I think any other questions in terms of like classes or schedules, I'm gonna keep it for the Q&A, and then if you guys have questions for the stream specifically or lighting, let's just focus on those. That way we have a fair chance of answering those questions too. Okay, so definitely way too foggy now. Let's go back to volumetric, tone it down. But now our zombies are a lot more silhouetted, which is nice. And is it physically accurate? Is this such a small sign can be so bright? Maybe not, but does it make the focal point read better? And if your goal is straight accuracy, sorry to break it, but in movies or TV shows or any kind of photography shoot, or if you look at the car shoot behind the scenes, there's tons of light sources that are faking stuff. And we have to go for what's more pleasing, um, while still keeping it realistic, but going for what looks better visually. Keep messing with the volumetrics. Okay, that's pretty good. All right, so I want to show you guys the light channel, and probably the best way to do that will be to show it on the character. Um, so let's drop in our foreground character, and we'll talk about the character lighting, just because that was a really big part of my career. So for that, remember we have that tool that I showed, the palette tool. Let's just make sure we can save, Control Shift S. I'm gonna go to Window, sorry, Tools, Actor Palette 1, and let's find tool character. Map. Choose level. Characters. I think this is the one. Okay. Let's see. I want to find the person that can maybe react to zombies in some kind of way. Maybe there's a storytelling between. Uh, maybe they're seeing the zombies and they're not even, affected by them. Maybe they're running away. Maybe they're walking to the subway and they're on their phone. That can be an interesting one. Um, not really, and I want to have the character face them, so we're not really going to see their face expressions, unfortunately, for that shot. But it will be a great shot to introduce the reverse of that, and then show the character's face and reaction as the sound increases. They may be dropping their phones, but we just don't have the full time to make a cinematic. It'll take us weeks. Let's drop in this guy. He's pretty confident. Actually, let's cancel that. Let's make sure we're putting stuff into the right level. I'm going to double click on the crowd, basically like layers in Photoshop, and drop it in the appropriate level. Drop him in. And let's see how that looks like from the camera. Back to my sequencer. Feels a bit kind of stoic. Let's see. The problem is too many variations, right? Just like with anything left, you have too many options. It's kind of hard to pick now. Let's try this guy. Wait, I lost him. There's a guy like leaning on his elbow. Yeah, there it is. Just having a casual beer, drinking a cigarette. Maybe they're not affected by the zombies. Maybe they um, lived through it for so long. And let's give him some kind of prop. I do like how dark they are. They're very silhouetted and then not really affected by light sources. Sometimes less lighting is more in that case. Okay, going back to the palette toolkit and let's look at the props. So this workflow is really helpful if you have like a zoo scene of all the assets, and we pretty much it's common to make them even for your personal portfolio or presenting work. It's good to kind of show everything and all how it was assembled, but it's also good to use this kind of tool. Um, so looking for some kind of outdoor prop. Hmm. Oh, that's definitely a nice touch, like adding a bicycle in there, and then that creates like a bit of a shadow, visual interest for that. Again, unfortunately, I'm not gonna have time to set dress this, but I'll definitely go in and probably after the stream work on this more and add foreground elements. Um, let's see. I mean, maybe this will work. Actually, electrical box I think is better because it's just like more of a thinner shape. And let's make sure we setting it back to our street level, putting stuff in appropriate maps. Put electrical box. Unreal starts to chug a little bit. I do have two maps open and streaming. Um, okay, let's exit out the camera and see how that looks like up close. And then we can cheat it. You want to avoid scaling assets too much, like rocks and stuff, depending on how their material is set up. If it's using a projection material, obviously you're fine. But in this case, that aligns perfectly. Let's see what that looks like. And I know this is in the middle of the street, but we're not really seeing that from this shot. It seems like they're just about to cross the sidewalk. So I'm just gonna keep it like that. Let's increase that a little bit more. And I do remember we have to talk about light channels. I promised that earlier on, so we'll talk about that next. Um, okay. All right. So let's think about the light source that can serve us as a rim light, and that's usually um, like the heaviest or the strongest light in your scene that comes at the glazing angle, right? So in my case, you know, if I turn all the lights off and just put a light behind me, that's going to be my rim light, or as they call it, like a silhouette or a contour light. And that light can be cheated in a way. Let's switch back to lighting sublevel. Can be cheated in a way where it's only going to affect the characters and not the environment, so we don't give it away. So I'm gonna search for spotlight, drop it in, press OK, and just to kind of demonstrate it, I'm going to increase the intensity by a lot and see how the light source affects the character and the ground and all of that. Now I want this light to only affect our lovely guy here. So what we have to do is we have to set it to different channels. So I'm going to search for channel, set it to channel 1 only, and check channel 0. Now nothing in our environment is set to channel 1, so this light does not affect anything. But if I select my guy and keep them on channel 0, because I do still want the ambient light, and add channel 1, now you see basically receiving that light source, but nothing else gets affected. Now, that giveaway is obviously the volumetrics. So let's disable that. I'm going to set that to 0. We don't want that. This is just. And now you see that light, if I make it even super intense, just visually, this is like very bright. Does not affect the ground at all. That's a great kind of way to trick it. You don't want to overdo it because that can break continuity of your lighting scenario, but this can definitely be helpful for some quick cheats here and there. I know I'm getting tons of arrows. It's mostly just me streaming and having a 32 gigs of RAM. I would really suggest like 64 gigs at this point. Um, if anyone has some good RAM recommendations or places to buy RAM, let me know. Okay, so adding that, and let's add some more green. So that's basically me faking light source from this to affect the character a little bit more. Right, so that adds like a little nice touch. Let's do the same thing for this character. Oh, so the reason that this character is not reacting is that we don't have the channel set. So let's add a second channel. And now this light source will also react. Now, would I like this for gameplay? Definitely not. It's very expensive in terms of performance. I would keep my environment lighting, and then lights I'm adding for characters will be my sequencer light sources. Okay. There are zombies. No car. They're jaywalking. Not at this point. Yeah, they're about. I think they're just like waiting for zombies to take them. Not sure. Maybe they're being prepared for this moment. Hopefully it's not too obvious that they're in the middle of the street. I don't know. Do you guys think that it's too obvious that there's? I was trying to kind of go for the idea that they're on the sidewalk. Um, but we can always add the sidewalk later. Going back to the beginning of the stream, was there a specific reason you chose to scale? Chose the scale you chose for your gray box assets? Do you usually always use the same scaled objects for all the projects? That's a really good question. So, um, Unreal obviously is based on centimeters and real life scale. So the way that I blocked out those objects is mostly um, using the mannequins. They're roughly, I think, 180 centimeters tall or 5'10", somewhere around that. And I was just relying on um, the mannequin scale to block it out. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, cool. All right. Do you want to add just one more zombie maybe somewhere in the scene, and then we'll leave some time for Q&A in just a few minutes, hopefully. All right. For this, I'm going to stop my palette tool and just kind of browse for the zombies in the asset browser because I do want to show you how that works too. So let's go to content browser, or we can have multiple content browsers. So window, content browser, number 2. Usually just dock it somewhere here. Okay, let's see what we're working with. So in terms of zombies, that's going to be our infected back. They do have a control rig also, I believe, but I'm mostly using this as like a still image, right? If you would need an actual animation, you can retarget to those, but obviously we won't get into retargeting today. I like the groups example, but I don't want to overdo it either. Let me see if there is. Yeah, no, that's way too much. Let's see what that looks like though. It's really cool how slated they are, but it just doesn't make sense from the story wise, I think. Maybe if you had an animatable camera, camera going behind them and then flying through the city, and then you kind of flying between the zombies. Maybe they already killed all those zombies or fought them, and now the new wave is coming. Um, and it's really nicely lit here, but I just think like from the story point doesn't really make sense. This is my idea was this is like the first encounter that the player sees. Um, kind of going through different positions. Let's exit out from the sequencer just so we kind of can look at it. Where'd this lady go? Okay, there she is. Now I'm just gonna kind of cheat her location, something like that. It's a nice touch. Maybe somewhere more in the distance, so it's not so obvious. You can also use just these. Push her back. Yeah, I think that starts to look pretty good. Well, I want to leave some time for Q&A. But just to kind of walk you through my process, finish up on a few notes. Lighting is very subjective, and the best way to really learn it is, um, finding a movie reference that you like, trying to recreate that in the engine, um, planning out what is that you're trying to show, planning out your focal points. In this case, my focal point was this um, subway station. I started off with the idea of the encounter. I wanted the player to have some kind of choice. We just didn't have time to address this, but maybe there is this and then a potential boss fight later down the street or an objective down the street. You also want to guide the player eye and make a decision for them without making it too obvious, right? There's also a fine line where it becomes too obvious. You start painting stuff with yellow paint and pointing stuff out too much. That's I like to kind of like hint instead of being too obvious. So I'm just going in and a little bit adding a bit of a fill for that subway station extraction point. Maybe that's their next objective, whatnot. Oh, see how these shadows are really unnaturally sharp, almost crispy-like? Unreal does love to do that for whatever reason. Just one more thing before we get to Q&A. I want to show you how to fix that. Um, so I'm going to go to that light source here, and bigger light sources will give you softer shadows. So I'm going to change that source radius to 100. That's too much. Let's try 50, 25. So see how 0 before and then 25 after? Just a bit of a softer shadow, I think. And I'm going to slightly lower that as well. Cool. And again, notice we haven't really covered lumen settings, any kind of rendering. This is just a raw Unreal screen wrap while streaming, while not having the best, RAM. Can only be a lot better. If I had a bit more time, I would go in and highlight the buildings maybe a bit more, add a bit more emission in there. Um, this can be a lot better defined, adding more of set dressing elements, maybe exposed wires or cables, definitely a lot more in the foreground. Um, and possibilities are essentially endless there. Um, yeah, hopefully you guys are able to learn something, and I think we can get to some Q&A. Anyone has any questions? Mhm.
Thanks, Eric. This is a great demo. So yeah, opening it up to the chat. If anybody wants to jump in and ask some questions, we can also jump back to the scene if there's something specific somebody has a question about as well.
Mhm. Cool. While we're waiting for questions, I'll just keep talking.
Sure.
Some common resources to look at, specifically if you're interested in lighting, um, is look at the Shot Deck website. Again, we're not associated, I'm not sponsored or anything. I personally use that website. It has resources from actual movie frames, so it costs a lot of time and a lot of resources to light those practically. And notice that my reference also had a lot of pictures from movies as well. And try to match a movie frame, and you'll, I think, learn a lot more about lighting instead of matching the reality. Because unfortunately, sometimes reality is pretty boring. Like, it can be overcast day, and then it's not a great lighting to match. Um, I personally really enjoy kind of like theatrical lighting, almost where you can see like harsh contrast, silhouetted lighting. But this is just a personal kind of taste thing. But I'll definitely study practical lighting, study how, um, you know, even stuff like a soccer stadium or a football stadium, that also takes a lot of work and effort to light physically in the real world. Making sure all the players can be seen from the distance. Look at the light source that they're using. Look at your car. See what the light source that your car has. How does it affecting? What kind of outer cone angle it has? Think about if you were to recreate this in Unreal, what kind of light source would you use and why? Um, should look at some questions. Do you have any go-to CVARs for troubleshooting lumen issues such as noise, or do you find it better to adjust light source itself? Um, Really good point. I think it's a combination of both, but I would definitely rely on the light source itself. As you can see, there was not too much noise in my scene. And then CVARs are there to essentially enhance stuff that does not get processed in your viewport. So maybe that information is there, that texture is there, it can be scaled up, but it's not necessarily going to be pixel or flickering. And I would definitely rely less on emissive materials. I specifically picked an emissive environment so you can see how that can still come out as a clean render, and rely on your light sources more. And that's usually way to fix noise. Not having too shiny of objects, if not necessarily. Messing with the roughness parameters can help you kind of get rid of that noise. That's my common suggestions. I do have a CVAR list, and maybe I can share that with you somehow later. I also have my own Discord for Unreal users specifically. I believe we share that in the chat, but I can put that in, and you guys can always reach out to me. Or I would love to see if for those of you who work with Unreal, if you have any questions. I'm going to post that link before we head out. For me, I think I did ask my question in a general sense. I hope that the person intro class can be provided online. There's a lot of overlap between the intro class and then intro to VP class. VP class is focusing a bit more on animation, cameras, and also a bit of a practical side of things. Obviously, it's an online class, so we're limited. But as far as just general approach with Overline, overlaps are pretty similar. I do think the online class is a bit more advanced, though. What are your thoughts on AI in the art industry right now? Are we all afraid of it? What effect did you see in your line of work? Yeah, that's a really loaded question, and then I'll just kind of share my own honest opinion. I think it's definitely so far what I've seen, the results are negative. Unfortunately, a lot of people kind of being affected, and especially stuff, more obvious stuff, like voice actors or concept artists. And to me, if the person praises AI and relies on AI as their main point of creativity, usually the less creative they are, I tend to notice. A lot of business people like AI, and most artists I interact with, there's even the term like AI slop. But I do use it personally. I do use it to like organize text files, um, sometimes even emails. English is my second language, so I do sometimes run it through AI just to fix like grammar mistakes or whatever. Like I use ChatGPT. I tested Claude as well recently, and you can do some impressive things. So just to give you an example, things that I was using it for. I did not use it to make any art. I was able to give it a folder on my computer, and I downloaded a whole bunch of pictures of like um, cats and dogs, and I was like, "Hey, Claude, go on those pictures and name the files based on how many cats and dogs you see." And it actually named them all in order. So I was thinking, oh, this can be a great way to like use your textures, name your textures somehow, or automate things that we do find boring. Whenever it's naming files, moving files between projects, compiling the shaders. So I definitely will be interested to learn more about that and trying to learn. But there's definitely a lot of overhype. Data centers, so it's a whole other topic. But we don't really use heavily AI at work day to day. Most of our work is in VFX, is Houdini, Maya, and Unreal. So just kind of speaking from the first point of experience. Um, I do see other people use it for like storyboards. I again storyboard and it's art in its own. And you can really tell if the storyboard is made with AI. It kind of throws me off a little bit sometimes. So hopefully that answers your question in terms of AI.
I think that covers it.
Okay, cool. Do you have any other questions? Seems post-process volume settings are mostly left alone. Yeah, unfortunately, I just ran out of time to be honest. Definitely use those a lot, but in terms of my lighting workflow, I keep it to the very last post-process. I think of it in terms of like your Unreal lighting is your physical lighting. If you compare that to the real world, you're setting up your lights, you're setting up your composition. Then post-process tool is just like a color grading tool for me. And then the way to adjust lumen settings, and those things. Okay, glad I was able to answer you guys' questions. That's the whole point of doing this live, is that you guys have opportunity to ask, specific questions that cannot be asked otherwise. Cool. If no one has any other questions,
Yeah, last call for questions.
going once, going twice.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody, and thanks so much, Eric, for. Here's one question at the
Okay, let's
at the
quickly
buzzer.
do last question. Why would you use Maya for something like this? You made not something like Maya, for example, since you're bringing assets that are ready. Why would you not use? Oh, I want to be clear. I would definitely use Maya to model 3D Vs. And I just the reason I was kind of talking bad about Maya and Blender, whatever at the beginning, is I think that it's much better to gray box and Blockout and Unreal than Maya because you can play test and then see it changes life. But definitely Maya to model and do all the beveling, high poly modeling. Um, that answers your question. When teaching a gnome and working outside, how do you handle new updates to the software? Um, we usually at work we are about 1 or 2 versions behind, just for sake of safety. We also have some plugins that are getting time to be updated. When teaching, I always prefer to teach the latest, and we teach the latest for most of the classes, if not all. It's a great way to show you the latest tools, and also a great way for instructors to be up to date and then learn selfishly for ourselves. I do want to know what those tools are for. I do want to learn them, and that's why I want to teach them in class as well. Could you explain naming conventions and assets organization? That's our first week one. We spent 3 hours just going over that.
Yeah, there's some good guides online. One that I know of, it's an easy Google search. Is if you just search Unreal 5 style guide. There's a GitHub a guy that I know is really great, Michael Aller. If you do a Google search for that, he has a great breakdown of not only um, naming conventions for files, and there's not really no standard. It's kind of what what is decided on the project, or if you're working on a personal project, is consistency, right? um, but it's good to come up with a system and stick to it, just so that you can stay organized. And in addition to naming conventions, he also has a good layout for like how he likes to organize his content browser and things like that for projects.
Yep. Well,
Yeah. um
I think they're asking. Some people are asking for Discord link. So I can just put it in the chat then. So I want to be clear. This Discord is just something that, um, a few of my past students are in there. And then some of my friends are in there. It's mostly revolves around Unreal. I do share some tips, tricks there. I share sometimes if there's like a job opening, even if it's remote, I share it in there. But it's a community that mostly consists of the students, and just be mindful, keep it Unreal centric and respectful. And then you guys are welcome to join, of course. I'm gonna post it in the chat.
Maybe you can drop it in
Oh,
the
okay,
private
cool.
chat, and then the host can
Drop it.
move it
Okay.
to the.
Cool. Let's see if there's any other questions. What is something that you personally like or modeling in Unreal? I personally don't really model in Unreal. I only do blackouts. If that's what you're asking. And even for blackouts, for my day-to-day job, I don't really blackout either. I'm mostly kind of focusing on the virtual production side of things. Uh, so I dropped the Discord in the chat. You guys are welcome to join. Just keep it Unreal centric.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks again, Eric. Such a great demo, and it's really awesome to see something like that come together so quick with the lighting. Unreal's great with that. As far as obviously your skill is fantastic, but it's so great to just jump into Unreal and start working with stuff. It's one of those things. It's really beginner friendly, and if you get into one of Eric's intro classes, he'll show you all the tips and tricks and secrets that he knows to make something look great. So yeah, so again, huge thanks. And just a couple other things I'm supposed to mention here. It is a ways off. The summer registration is a ways off. It doesn't start until May 28th. But again, if you pre-registered for the stream tonight, we will be sending out a discount code via email if you're interested in that class. Also, obviously, thanks everybody out there for showing up and participating and watching. We do have these streams fairly frequently, and we're always happy to have you guys on board. So thank you so much, Eric, and thanks everybody out there. We're gonna shut it down.
Just one thing real quickly, and just thank you guys all for attending. I know it was really fast. I probably jumped around too much. Hopefully, there's a recording available. You can watch other streams as well. And also thanks for any of my past students or current students that are watching this. I've seen some comments that you guys are mentioning me, so hello there. Hopefully, this was helpful for you. And for those of you who are considering taking the class, you can always look up on my LinkedIn, and then I share what other students are making, so that can give you kind of a sense of things. And some of those students already have a really intense background, so don't feel intimidated by it. But some of them are relatively new to Unreal, and then they're usually able to pull stuff off pretty well. And then thank you, obviously, Noman, for having me, and thank you, Anton. It's an honor to be here, especially looking at the previous streams. It's definitely a time well spent, I think.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure, man. All right. Take it easy, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you all. Bye.
See ya. Bye.